I appreciate that. We'll get deeper into it, but thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today to speak to you all. This is a continuation of part one, which we did, but back in January, I think. And so the way I'm going to break this down is I'm going to go through in the first part of today's presentation, we'll go through and just go back over what we talked about 3 months ago quickly, simply because there are going to be some of you here who were not on that call. And then for the rest of us, we probably don't remember exactly what I said. And so we'll go back over that briefly. And then part two, we'll get, I was asked to talk a little bit more about how do we actually do this with our children, not just the theology behind what the Bible says about raising our children financially well, but what does it actually look like to do these things with our family in our homes? And so as Pavel introduced, I'm Brian Holtz. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for Compass Global. I have been married for 17 years now to beautiful Erica right here. And then I have 4 children from the ages of 14 down to the youngest, just turned 6, little baby Eden here. She turned 6 just a week ago. And so I've had the pleasure of working in the corporate world for 15 years here in the US, all throughout the Midwest. 3 years ago in 2000, I'm sorry, yeah, about 3 years ago, 2022, I joined the Compass team as the Chief Operating Officer and then moved into the Chief Executive Officer role here this January. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to write the book, Financial Discipleship for Families, Intentionally Raising Faithful Children, which was my attempt to document how Eric and I have learned to raise our children well financially, but to do it not from the perspective of someone who is retired and they're a grandparent and they remember all the good parts of parenting and trying to teach our kids valuable lessons, but to really walk alongside those of us who are actively doing it. The things I talk about in the book and the things I'll talk about here today with you, they're things we're trying right now with a 14-year-old who's getting ready to turn 15, and we're thinking about when he starts driving and sending him to university, all the way down to the 6-year-old who's just now trying to figure out how money can buy her food at McDonald's. These are things we are learning right now as we go. And so we wanted to share that. It's all based on scriptural teaching. Erica and I went through some bumpy times in our financial lives, and we turned to God in the Bible and learned that he had a lot to say about money. And so we've implemented those in our lives and felt called to do the same with our children. And so that's really where this book and today's teaching is going to come from. As many of you know, Compass can be found at compassfinancialministry.org. That would be the United States-based site. And then compass1.edu would be the European site. And so anything that you learn about here that you want to learn more about, how do you apply this in your life? How do you bring it to your family or to your friends? Visit those websites to find a number of resources that can help you. So financial discipleship for families, or financial discipleship in our homes. Why does this topic matter? It matters for a few very important reasons. First, we exist to glorify God. We're taught this in Isaiah 43, 4 through 7. And I'll just read to you the end of verse 6 and into verse 7, where it says, "Bring my sons from afar and my daughters from the ends of the earth. Everyone who is called by my name, whom I created for my glory, whom I formed and made." We exist for the glory of God. He doesn't need us. He simply created us because he enjoys us. And we are here to honor him and to glorify him with our lives and with our money. Second, finances are God's favorite teaching tool. So there are 2,350 verses and a number of parables that use money as a teaching tool. It's not because money is so important in our lives, but because the spirit of mammon can draw us away from right worship with God. We can either use money to serve him and to honor him well, or we can be trapped by the spirit of mammon, be led astray, and become self-reliant. And so this topic of money is very important. Third, God calls us to disciple our children. We find this in Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 through 9, where we are taught that these commands have been impressed on our hearts, and we are to impress them on our children, to talk about them when we sit down at home and when we walk along the road and when we lie down and when we get up. These are supposed to be passed on from generation to generation. And fourth, God promises us a legacy if we will follow his instructions. We see that in Exodus 20, verses 5 through 6. It says, "You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third or fourth generation, but to those who are faithful to me, but showing love to 1,000 generations, to those who keep my commandments." And so we see that this topic of money must be carried into our homes. It must be passed along to our children so that our children can benefit from those teachings. The next thing we want to cover are the foundational concepts of the book that I wrote. And so there are three major themes that we want to plant our flag on. The first is to be intentional parents rather than coincidental parents. So as intentional parents, we've defined a goal for our children's lives. And so it's not necessarily that we want them to be rich or famous or we want them to be a doctor, but what we really want for them is to follow Christ, for them to be kind, compassionate, responsible, to exhibit the fruit of the Spirit. We want to have an intentional goal, but most of us haven't really thought about that. We just believe that we're going to raise our children to be healthy, to be faithful and kind, but we haven't really thought about what that takes. And so the next is to be active parents rather than reactive parents. A reactive parent waits until something goes wrong, and then we tell our children what they should have done instead, versus being an active parent and looking forward to where this is going and saying what you're about to do is not going to achieve the goal that we want for you. And so I'd like to tell you a better way. And so we still allow the child to choose in many cases, but we're actively parenting rather than just waiting back and correcting mistakes that are made. And then finally, we want to use influence rather than control whenever possible. Now, this doesn't mean that if our child is going to cause themselves harm to themselves or to someone else, we don't step in and stop them. But most of the time, what we want to do is we want to use influence. We want to teach and train and not simply just command and forbid they do anything that we don't like, but to simply point out the advantages and let them experience some of the consequences of their poor decisions. So as parents, we have three key responsibilities out of Scripture. The first is to protect, and we see this in Luke 17, verse 2. This is keeping them from harm. It says it would be better for them to be thrown into the sea with a millstone tied around their neck than to cause one of these to stumble. We don't want our children to actually be led into harm, right? So we don't want their siblings to use them as a toy, and we don't want the dog to step on them. We are absolutely called to protect them. But there's more to being a parent. We're also called to provide. So we see this in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 8, meeting their physical needs. Paul writes, anyone who does not provide for their relatives and especially their own household has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. We're absolutely called to provide for their needs in addition to protecting, but we're called to more than that as parents. We're also called to prepare them, to equip them to follow Jesus. Psalm 78, verses 2 through 4 say, "For I will speak to you in a parable. I will teach you hidden lessons from our past, stories we have heard and known, stories our ancestors handed down to us. We will not hide these truths from our children. We will tell them to the next generation about glorious deeds of the Lord, about his power and his mighty wonders." And so when we do all three of these, when we protect them, when we provide for them, and when we prepare them, we're truly fulfilling the calling that we see in Scripture of a parent. And so in the US, we have a term called MVP. And so I had to introduce this last time that we were on the call because this apparently is an American term that may not be known in Europe. So the MVP in America is called the most valuable player. The initials are MVP. And so this is an award given to a team or a league's best player. So if you are the best football player on your team at the end of the season, you're called the MVP, the most valuable player. Well, in the US, here at Compass, we've used this same initialization to mean MVP parenting. And what we mean by that is that we provide modeling, we provide verbal instruction, and we provide practical opportunities. So in 1 Corinthians 11:1, we're told to follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. We do this for our children by exhibiting a behavior in a way that they can actually see. So if I want my children to learn to pray, I need to pray in front of them so that they can see me pray and they can understand the value. Next, we provide verbal instruction. And so this is instructed in Deuteronomy 11, verse 19, where it says, teach them to your children, talking about them when you sit down at home. We want to actually explain what they see and why we're doing it in a way that they can understand. Then finally, we provide practical opportunities by inviting them to participate in a way that they'll actually try. And Jesus demonstrates this in Luke 9 and 10, where he sends out 12 disciples to heal and cast out demons, and then they come back and he sends out another 72 to heal and cast out demons. It's not good enough for him to just do the healing and the casting out, but then he explains what power by which he does this. He then says, now you go try it. And when you're done, come back and we'll talk about how this worked and how it didn't work. And it gives us opportunities to coach our children. With that, I'll open the floor for questions. So again, that is simply a review of what we talked about last time. You're muted, Pavel.
Sorry, yeah. Thank you, Brian. So you've written a book, but have you already tested this as a small group training in a church or kind of group teaching in a church? I mean, have you thought of organizing it as a teaching in a church setting?
Yes, we have. So we've had a few small groups who've used it in their small group studies. And so the format of the book, my favorite way of discussing a book of any kind is to go through a chapter. And at the end of each chapter, I have a section that's called 3 Key Takeaways. And so what I recommend, anytime I read a book, I do this. And when I discuss it with someone, I read the whole chapter and I'll underline what I find important or things I disagree with. And I make a star next to things that are really important. And then when the chapter's over, I go back and I reread those notes. And I just say, what are the 3 most important things that I learned? And I found those to be really effective discussion tools where you can sit down with a friend or a small group or just a group and talk about what was challenging, what was interesting, what was new, what was convicting, where the Spirit really spoke to me that maybe I'm not doing this well. But we have seen the book used in several small group settings, Pavel.
Okay, great. And what do you think about studying this material together with other families, together with the children? So is it better that only the parents stay for these classes, or should they join together, parents and children?
Yes, I think the book is written more appropriately only for the parents. But the book really, as you'll find in the second half of this, the book is a method for parents to have the conversation. So the natural outcome, once they've read the book, is to go actually do it. If we go back to the MVP model, the challenge that I place is that as parents, we should do what we're asking our children to do. And then we should go explain what we did and why we did it. And then finally, to invite them to come alongside us. And so as we'll see, that's going to come through in all of the financial areas of our lives, but also many other areas. If I'm leading something at church, I should do that where my children can see it. I should explain why it's important and why I'm doing it the way I'm doing it. And then finally, I invite them to come along. And so while I don't know that the children will get as much out of actually reading the book, they will certainly get a lot out of the discussions, because the parent ought to be the chief discipler of their children. That's one of the goals. And the goal of the book is really to equip a parent to be able to go have those conversations.
Okay, thank you. And we mostly talk about the positive things. Okay, we have a plan, we have a budget, or we have things that we plan to do as a family. But what if our financial life is a mess, or if you are in trouble? Maybe you talk about it, but what do we tell to our children, and what do we not tell our children?
Yeah, I think I think having an open line of communication is very important. If I want my children to learn from my mistakes, they have to know that I've made them. And now, depending on the ages and the specific topic, there may be things you share or don't share. Sharing your income in the US is a very taboo topic. You don't talk about how much money you make. It's probably that way in Europe and many other parts of the country. But through prayer and discernment and discussion with my wife, we decide whether or not we want to have this conversation with our children. Just this week, we have a bill for one of our vehicles is going to cost $4,000 US to fix. And so we have a very open conversation with our children that this is what it costs to own a vehicle. Now, does it always cost $4,000? It doesn't, but this week it does. And so before you buy a vehicle, you have to be prepared to pay for the upkeep. And so there are very valuable lessons that they may not learn if I don't share them. Now, we always want it to be productive. We don't want it to put a burden on them that they're not mature enough to handle. And so we want to talk between my wife and I and communicate with the Lord about what is appropriate. What do I want them to learn? How do I believe they can learn from the situation that I'm in? But there's a lot of learning that could be had as we walk alongside our kids and allow them to be a part of our conversations.
Okay, thank you. We don't have other questions. So
okay.
remember to use the Q&A, and then we'll have a second part with questions.
Wonderful. So now we'll move on to the second part of this, which is, again, a little bit more practical. So how do we actually use these foundational principles in our homes? The first thing that we learned as Erica and I were trying to figure out how do we teach these things to our children is that there's a difficulty in that in order to understand being a faithful steward and managing money God's way, you actually have to have income and expenses, don't you? And while that seems very obvious and simple, for children who live in the home, they don't have income because their job is going to school, and they don't have expenses because we buy all of their food and their things. And so really, to even start this process of children understanding how to be faithful stewards, we needed to give them income, we needed to give them expenses, and we needed to help them create a plan for how to use them. Same way that we do as adults. We have a budget. And so all of my kids, the 14-year-old, the 12-year-old, the 8-year-old, and the 6-year-old, each have income, they have expenses, and they have a budget, which they get to have a say in. They make some decisions about where things go through conversation. And so we're going to talk about how our family does that. So the first thing we have to do is provide them with income. And this is a difficult conversation that as a family, we have to work through. There are a few ways that children can earn income. One is what we in the US call an allowance, where we simply give them money. The second is chores, where a member of the family is responsible for maintaining some part of the house, whether it's cleaning the kitchen or sweeping the floors. And then the third would be employment, and this would be money that they earn outside of the home. Now, again, I want to remind us that throughout this, we want to focus on MVP. How do we model the earning of income as an income earner or as a family that has income? Do my children know that I have a job? Second, How do we explain the value of work? Not only that there is absolutely an income, and there's value of work financially, but God has created us to be workers, to have employment, to be productive in general. And then finally, we want to offer them an opportunity to earn income, whether it's through an allowance or chores or employment. Now, there's a lot of discussion that can be had about should a child be given money without having to do chores, or should they be expected to do chores because they live in the house? And I really think this is a decision that has to come down to the family. In our family, we started by giving our children chores, and they would earn money based on the chores that they did. But what we found, it was kind of funny, some of the younger ones, they would say, I don't want to clean the bathroom because I don't need any money. I still have the money from last week, so I'm not going to clean the bathroom. Well, now we've broken down the whole system. They don't have income, so now they won't have expenses, and now they can't learn to manage money God's way. So in our family, we give our children an allowance without them doing chores. We do still expect them to do chores. So each of our kids has an age-appropriate task that, because they live in our house, they're responsible for doing some part of the work. But our 14-year-old receives $14 a week. Our 12-year-old gets $12 a week. Our 8-year-old gets $8 a week. And the 6-year-old, you guessed it, gets $6 a week. And from that money, they have a budget that they have to make some decisions and plan around. So the goal isn't that you agree with what Erica and I have decided. The goal is that you be intentional. What is best for your family? What's going to help your children best learn the value of income? Have that conversation with your spouse. Have that conversation with your children so they understand. Next, we move into expenses, and this is how money is used. We always want to provide our children meaningful financial responsibilities, and these don't have to be big. But if a child only is responsible for buying them candy, then that's not all that helpful, is it? They need to have meaningful responsibilities. And the three big buckets are: 1, to give. We are called to be generous. 2 is to save, so to save for future expenses. And 3rd, to spend responsibly. So first, giving. The act of generosity is a fruit of the Spirit, and it's an act of faith. We have to rely on God, so we give the first fruits of every harvest. And so a few different ways that we can give is first to the church. So in our family, we require all of our children to give 10% to the local church. And even though that's a small amount for the 6-year-old, it is something, and she's developing that habit and that understanding that she's always going to contribute to the local church. Next is interest-related kingdom work. So we had a fun opportunity this spring where we gave each of our children money to give to something that they were excited about. And so our 14-year-old gave to a youth group from a different church, so that way the youth group could do something fun to help people learn about Jesus. And he wrote a letter to them and sent the check, and that was money that we had given him. The 12-year-old gave to an organization that uses soccer to teach biblical principles in Africa, and he loves to play football. So the football club in Africa received some money from Barrett. The 8-year-old really enjoys puppies, and so we found a Christian ministry that uses dogs to share the love of Christ. And so he wrote a letter and he gave to that. And then our 6-year-old, she loves babies, and so she found an orphanage that helps those orphans find adoptive parents. And so she wrote a short letter and mailed that money to them. But this allows them to be a part of the giving process, to truly experience the joy of generosity through their lives. And for all of us, we can give to our local Compass affiliate because they are doing God's work. They're sharing the love of Christ and the freedom from financial woes that we've all learned. And so just taking any ministry that's made an impact on our lives and teaching our children to impact that financially is a very valuable lesson. And again, remember that modeling, verbal explanation, and practical opportunities. We want to do it ourselves where they can see it. We want to explain what we've done and why. And then we want to invite them to be a part of it. Next is saving. So saving is the intentional planning and discipline that we want our children to learn, to think ahead about what are the things that I would like to spend money on, and then to actually just go through the week after week or month after month of putting the money aside. So in our family, we have short-term savings for things like gifts or clothes or going on holiday. And then we have long-term savings where they're saving money for a vehicle someday or going to university. Once again, we want to model responsible savings ourselves. We want to explain what it is that we save for and why we save for those things. And then we want to help them save for those long and short-term expenses. So in our family, each one of our children has a budget. And when we give them money, we help them put that money in the envelope, and they know exactly what they're saving for in future expenses, along with some money that they're going to have the opportunity to spend how they want to. And so that takes us to spending. This teaches our children the value of and the limited nature of money, that you can only spend money once, and when it's all gone, it's all gone. And so they get to spend money on things they have saved for, and then also some things that they have not saved for. Again, we want to model responsible spending. We want to explain responsible spending to our kids. Why did we spend on what we spent on? And then finally, we want to give them opportunities. And so in our family, the way that we've done this is that each of our children are responsible for saving for each other's Christmas and birthday gifts. So the 6-year-old has an envelope to buy the 8-year-old a birthday gift. And the 14-year-old has an envelope for each of the other siblings and for Erica and myself. And so they get to set the amount that they put in that envelope. And then when it's time to buy a gift, they pick out the gift. They have to choose something that's under the money that they've saved. And then they have the joy of giving that gift in a meaningful way, much more than if we had just paid for it. Some other ideas for things that you can give, expenses that you can give to your children that are meaningful. You could have them buy their own clothes. Again, you can have them be responsible for family member gifts or for vehicle fuel. So when they get their driver's license and they start driving, they have to buy their own fuel. Once again, in our family, we had this great experience. My 6-year-old had saved $6 to buy our neighbor a present. And so this weekend, we went to the local store and she walked around with her envelope and with its $6, and she tried to find a gift. And what she found was this present was a little too much, and so she couldn't afford it. And then this other one, she didn't really like very much, but she could afford it. And so she had to look for something that she thought our neighbor would enjoy, but also that was within her budget. That same day, she decided that she wanted to buy breakfast at McDonald's. Every kid loves McDonald's in every country. And so our children are responsible for buying that with their own money. And what she understands, even at the age of 6, is that if she buys breakfast today, she won't have money to buy breakfast tomorrow. She has to actually choose. Does she want to buy breakfast at McDonald's today, or does she want the ability to do something later? But as she determines what her priorities are, is it valuable enough to spend the money on? She's learning incredibly valuable lessons that most of us wish we would have learned at a much earlier age. With that, round 2 of questions. What questions do we have?
Yep. Thank you, Brian. So maybe I'm very late with educating my children, but somehow they show no interest in money. I don't know whether this is good or bad, but they don't do anything with money, we give them. So how should I inspire them to think more about this?
Yeah, I think this is one of the problems that we had, right? Where my son wasn't interested in doing his chore because he didn't need the money anymore. And so by giving him responsibilities and expenses that he had to save for, that made it a priority. So allowing them that even though it was inconvenient for me to drive my daughter to McDonald's, I really want her to encounter the remorse of buying something she didn't really want. She thought she wanted it, but in order to get them to take money seriously, because as adults, they can't avoid it, can they? We need to get them to learn at an early age. And so what I would recommend is finding those expenses that you expect them to pay for. So it could be something as simple as if your family's going to go on holiday this summer, encouraging them to save some money so that they could do something fun that you would say no to. When the children want to ride a roller coaster and they know I'm not going to spend my money on it, if they've saved money, then my answer is yes, because it's their money. And so the opportunity to have freedom to spend it the way that they see fit can really help them get excited about managing money at all. And then we can teach them managing money God's way.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, when will your children start investing? What will you suggest them?
We have our children investing at a very early age. And so what we do is our budget, they're required to give 10%. They have to save 10% for long term. And then the other money gets budgeted through expenses and savings for other children's gifts and money they want to spend. But that 10% of savings at the end of the year, we will choose what they want to invest in. And so I talked to them, even the 5-year-old, she wanted to invest in Disney because she loves Disney. And so we bought a little bit of Disney stock. And my older child, he's very nervous and he's afraid to take a lot of risks. And so he simply put it into a money market account that just earns interest because he doesn't want to lose the money, but it is invested. And so once again, it's that opportunity to have the conversation. I talk to them about what we invest in as adults. We explain why we invest it, and we give them the opportunity and we walk alongside them. And so there are times that some of them want to invest in something that's not a very good choice. And I talk to them about why I don't think it's a great choice. But most of the time, I'll let them do it because it's a small amount of money. And I'd rather them lose a little bit of money than lose a lot of money later when they don't know better, but they have money to invest.
Okay. And how do you have your children save money in cash or in a bank account?
So throughout the year, they save in cash. And so they have envelopes. And then once again, if they have a lot of money, so maybe after a birthday when relatives have given them a lot of money, we'll make a deposit into that bank account or investment account. But generally, we'll leave the money in the envelope throughout the year. Giving goes to church every week or every month. And then the money that's in the envelopes for buying gifts, that gets spent throughout the year. And so each one of them has a stack of envelopes that they'll put the money into in cash. I really like the idea that, children, money in an account is very abstract. It's hard for a 6-year-old to understand that money is limited when she doesn't hold it. But her going to the store and taking the $6 out of the envelope and actually handing them to the cashier, that has an impact on her. And so I like them encountering the money. They can look in there and see that it's gone. Our 6-year-old can't log on to her bank account and see how much money she has, but she can always go in her envelopes and say, I have money. Can I get McDonald's for lunch? As opposed to if it's only in a bank account, she may not know what she has. We like her to see that. And all of our kids, as they get older, they have more accounts and more ability to access technology. But certainly from the younger age, we like them to have cash in a small amount in an envelope that they can see and feel and touch.
Okay, thank you. And the next question, someone shares their story. I started to talk more with children about money and our expenses. And now I feel that sometimes they have mentality of scarcity, that we cannot afford more expensive things. How to avoid this?
So part of that is good. Part of that, the other problem is that there's no scarcity whatsoever. But really what we want to talk about is not that we don't have enough, but that we have to make a choice. We make a choice based on our priorities and what's important to us. Today, with that $4,000 bill for my minivan, I could just go buy a new car, but that means that there's something I can't buy later. And so earlier this year, we had a good conversation as a family where there was a pretty major expense, and we had the opportunity to say, would we rather own this thing, or would we rather go on a nice holiday this summer? And they said, well, do we have to choose? And the answer was yes, we really do have to choose. And so it's not that we want our children to be afraid that God's not going to provide, that there's not enough money to be able to eat. We want to discourage those things. Jesus will care for our physical needs. But it is in some ways good that they understand the limited nature of money. And so we always want to refocus the conversation that it's not that we don't have enough, it's that we don't have enough to do everything. We have to make choices about what's more important to us as an individual, as a family, and what reflects our faith. What's more important to God, that I do this or I do that? Because there will be times I can't do both.
Great, great. That was very helpful. Thank you. And could you share a little bit more about these difficult conversations when children start sharing about their classmates or neighbors and what belongings they have and how expensive smartphones they have and gadgets?
Yes, absolutely. So it can get challenging when our kids talk about money, which is a taboo topic. It's not taboo in our family, but it is taboo in the community. And so we do have a conversation with them that it's not appropriate to share. My children know what my income is, but I explain to them it's not good to share it with other people, not because it hurts me, but it will make them uncomfortable. And so in the spirit of love and not wanting to make others feel uncomfortable, it's not appropriate to share that. And likewise, their financial situation, it may make sense to have a conversation about it, but it shouldn't be the centerpiece. If it doesn't add value to the conversation, there's no reason to share how much money you have in a savings account. If it does add value and one of your friends is nervous about not having enough money, then it's a great time to share the fact that Jesus says that God has clothed the fields more beautifully than Solomon, and how much more does he care for us than just the flowers in the field. And so once again, we want to model the right behavior by we talk openly about money, but we reserve what we talk about in public. We want to explain why we talk about what we talk about, and then we expect them to follow suit by giving them the opportunity that when they're with friends, it's not appropriate to share my income with their friends because it's going to make their friends uncomfortable or their friends' parents uncomfortable. And so in the spirit of love, we want to hold that information back.
Okay, thank you. And the next question, I hope I understand it correctly, but I think it's more for a child which is already growing up and is in university, but still lives at home. And the university is in the same town, but the child doesn't have a job. So should the parents give cash money to this, pocket money to this child, or how should we encourage him or her to become more independent?
Great question. Once again, I think this is a matter of discussion with a spouse and with God, and there is no universal answer. I could make a very strong case that every university student should have a job to learn those valuable skills. But I could also tell you that for some, not having the distraction of a job may help them focus on their studies, which really is the goal of university, isn't it? And so depending on the child and depending on what we believe is best for them, that's that intentionality piece. If we think they aren't having a job simply because they want to sit at home and be a freeloader, then it's important that we encourage them to get a job. And by giving them expenses that they're responsible for, having that conversation to say, work is valuable and earning an income is valuable. Here's why it's important, and here's why that's important to us and to you. And now we encourage you to go do that by giving you expenses. Or on the flip side, if we really want that student to focus on their studies, to not be distracted by a job because maybe they struggle in school, have that conversation as well to say, we want you to be successful. University is the priority right now. And so we're allowing you to live at home. But don't think that it's because the real world won't expect you to work. We are letting you live here because we want you to focus on your studies and be successful at school. And we believe that's what's best for you right now. But having the conversation gives them the context for the decision that you've made, rather than them simply trying to figure out what it is. It is very healthy for most college students to have some income and some expenses. And so it could be that they have to buy their own food. It could be that they have to buy their own fuel for their vehicle or pay their own insurance for their vehicles. Any of those sorts of things would probably require them to get a job. But more than anything, it's really just the intentional conversation of what helps them learn what they need to learn to be a God-glorifying adult when they get out of university.
Okay. And one question about the balance, because I have very dear friends who, they talk about money and try to educate their children, but they at some point discovered that their children started to also talk too much about money and have some fears. And they said once to their parents, hey, if you don't have enough, you can take from our savings or something like this. So what could be a good balance to not talk too much about money?
Yeah, I think as long as you're talking about it in the right context, not in necessarily the dollars or the cents, but this idea that it's a Bible-based theology, that we believe that the Bible is true, we believe its instruction on money and possessions is true, that balances it out, because it really, the conversation is no longer about money at all, is it? It's about how we glorify God with money. Why has God entrusted these things into our care? And so I think reframing the conversation, not about do we have enough, but the conversation of will God provide enough? We all know the answer is yes. He may not provide everything I want, but will he provide enough? He will absolutely provide enough. It becomes less about money and more as money as a tool of worship, money as a method to glorify God. And when we bring the money into the proper context, the biblical context that it's used, I believe the conversation becomes reframed and there's less anxiety of not having enough and less fear of not using it well and those sorts of things. When we focus on what is the purpose of the money really, it's to glorify God. Well, what is the next step that I can take? And won't God provide me with enough money to glorify him? He absolutely will.
Okay, thank you very much. That was very helpful. I suggest we move to the breakout rooms, if you can share the questions.
Absolutely. So the questions I have in the breakout are these two. So as a group, how can you help your children to earn income in these different age groups? So think of some ideas of what can they do? Is allowance the right answer? Are chores the right answer for a 5 to 10-year-old, for an 11 to 15-year-old, for a 16-year-old or higher? Many of you have are parents of people in these age groups. And so just share your experiences of what's worked and what hasn't worked and why you think those are good options. And then the second is, what meaningful expenses can you give your children in your local context? Again, for 5 to 10-year-olds, for 11 to 15-year-olds, and for people who are 16 and over. What are some of the ways that they can use money wisely in a giving, saving, and spending